My name is Eva. My parents tried to steal the home I bled for so they could hand it to my sister like a baby shower gift. But instead of giving in, I made a move they'll never forget, and it cost them everything. Before we dive in, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, this story is going to hit home. It was a typical Friday evening in our beige suburban home, where the walls still held photos from happier times, long before any of this began. The scent of roast chicken filled the air. Mom always cooked the same thing when she wanted us to act like a normal family. We were halfway through dinner when I heard them whispering. "She doesn't need it like Julia does," my father murmured, barely audible over the clinking of forks. "Exactly," my mother replied. "Julia's pregnant. Eva's just wasting space out there alone." At first, I thought I'd misheard. My brain tried to twist the words into something less cruel, something that made sense. But then my mother added, almost too casually, "We'll just sell the country house. She won't fight us. She knows her sister needs it more." My heart pounded. The country house, my house, wasn't some vacation getaway. It was the reward for 5 years of double shifts, missed birthdays, and weekends spent sanding wood instead of resting. I'd saved every penny to buy it. I'd gutted it myself, room by room. That home was my independence, my sanity. "Excuse me." My voice cut the air, sharp as broken glass. All eyes turned to me. My mother, Victoria, didn't even flinch. "Don't eavesdrop, Eva, it's unbecoming." "Unbecoming," I laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "You're planning to sell my house behind my back, and I'm the problem." My sister Julia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She didn't say a word. Of course not. She never needed to, everyone else always spoke for her. "Your sister is pregnant, Eva," my mother snapped, her tone now razor-thin. "She needs space, a place to raise her child, and you can sleep in the car if you have to." It was so matter-of-fact, like they'd already decided my life was disposable. I stared at her, disbelief flooding every vein. "That house is mine. I bought it. You didn't even visit when I was scraping mold off the walls." "It's just a house," my father muttered. "Stop being dramatic." But it wasn't just a house. It was mine. And in that moment, something inside me cracked open. I stood up slowly, every movement deliberate, like I was afraid I might shatter if I moved too fast. My napkin slipped from my lap and landed on the plate with a soft thud, barely a sound, but it was the loudest thing in the room. "I hope that roast chicken was worth it," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "Because you just made it your last supper with me." I didn't wait for their reaction. I didn't slam the door. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I just walked out into the cold November night, coatless, breath fogging in front of me, heart pounding like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. The silence outside was deafening after the venom in that dining room. I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, eyes burning. Not crying, burning. Rage, betrayal, disbelief, they all fought for space inside me. And under it all, humiliation. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an obstacle, an inconvenience, a resource to be reallocated. I didn't start the car. I just sat there, staring at the empty driveway and the flickering porch light I'd installed for them last Christmas. The same one Julia had said made the house look too industrial. And all I could think was, they're going to try and take everything from me, everything I built. But they didn't know me. Not really. And they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. The morning after the dinner from hell, I woke up in the country house alone, physically at least. Emotionally, my mother's words still rang like a slap. "You can sleep in the car." I hadn't even turned on the heat that night. I needed the chill. It reminded me I was awake, that I wasn't imagining any of this. That my family, the people who watched me paint these walls and praised my stubbornness when it benefited them, were ready to toss me aside the second my house became more useful as someone else's nest. By 10 a.m., I heard gravel crunching. Julia's little blue SUV was coming up the drive, the same one my father had helped her buy when she crashed her last car texting. She parked like she owned the place and stepped out, oversized sunglasses, frothy pink scarf, and a latte in hand. No shame. Just her usual dramatic breeziness. I didn't move from the couch. Let her knock. She didn't, of course not. The door creaked open like it was hers. "Hello," I stayed quiet. Let her feel the weight of entering my space uninvited. "Oh good, you're here," Julia said, stepping into the living room like we were about to have brunch, not a reckoning. She took a long sip of her drink and looked around, eyes lingering on the cedar beams, the rustic fireplace I built with my own hands. "God, I forgot how cozy this place is." I said nothing. She smiled like we were still 10 and I'd stolen her glitter pen. "Look, Eva, I know last night was a little dramatic, but I just wanted to talk calmly. You and Mom both got really worked up." I blinked at her, slowly. She took it as permission to keep talking. "I just think you're not seeing the bigger picture. I mean, you're out here alone, and this place is really more than one person needs. Meanwhile, I'm about to have a baby." There it was, the soft pitch, the emotional manipulation wrapped in a pink bow. "So what, you want me to just hand you the deed with a diaper cake?" I said, standing up slowly. Julia laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. She sobered quickly. "Okay, I'm not saying you should just give it up, but maybe there's a way we both benefit, like we could sell it, split the money. You could move closer to the city. I could start fresh with the baby." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes were calculating. She was doing math behind those lashes, figuring how much guilt it would take to break me. I folded my arms. "You danced in nightclubs and took selfies on beaches while I worked doubles in hospital scrubs and saved every dollar I had. Now you want me to sell the one thing I own outright because you're pregnant?" Julia sighed and dropped the sweetness. "Eva, be reasonable. You don't even want kids. You've said that 1,000,000 times. That doesn't make me homeless by default," I snapped. The words landed, but she still tried to soften the blow. "I'm not trying to hurt you," she said quietly. "I just need help. You're my sister," I laughed. "Sisters don't sneak around with our parents and plot to sell each other's homes." Her eyes flared. "I didn't sneak. Mom and Dad told me this was their idea." I stepped closer. "And you just went along with it?" Silence. Outside, the wind picked up. The big pine tree by the porch creaked, a reminder of all the storms I'd weathered alone in this house, while they lived in their warm cocoon of shared lies. Julia looked down at her coffee like it held the answer. "You're going to make this difficult, aren't you?" I tilted my head. "No, Julia, I'm going to make it impossible." Her jaw clenched. "Fine." She grabbed her keys off the entry table like it was hers and stomped to the door. As it slammed behind her, the only sound that remained was the low hum of the heater and the silence of my conviction. They thought I would cave. They forgot I built this house with my own 2 hands, and I can rebuild my whole life without them if I have to. She came back 2 days later. No warning, no text. Just the sound of tires skidding over gravel and the slamming of her car door like she owned the ground she walked on. I should have locked the gate, but some part of me was curious. How far would she push this? I opened the door before she could knock. "Eva, come on," she said, trying to sound composed. "We don't have to be like this. I didn't invite you in." Julia rolled her eyes and pushed past me into the living room again. She always did that, walked into spaces like they belonged to her because someone else made it cozy and warm and safe. "I've been thinking about it," she said, setting her purse down on my coffee table like she planned to stay. "The house. The situation. You're clearly upset." "Brilliant deduction," I replied, crossing my arms. She brushed past the sarcasm. "I thought maybe there's a compromise, like what if we sell it and split the profits? That way we both get something. I can find a place for the baby and you can, I don't know, travel or something." "Travel," I repeated, stunned. "You think I want to give up the only stable thing in my life to fund your next mess and go sightseeing?" Her tone sharpened. "I'm not trying to start a fight, Eva. I'm trying to find a solution. You have something valuable, more than you need. I'm just asking to share it." "No, you're asking to take it." She stiffened. "I'm your sister. This isn't just about money, it's about family." My blood boiled. "Don't say that word to me," I said, voice low. "Because real family doesn't sit at a table and talk about selling your house like it's a used sofa. Real family doesn't tell you to sleep in your car because your uterus hasn't been busy enough." Julia flinched, but then crossed her arms defiantly. "I'm just asking for fairness." "No," I said. "You're asking for handouts again." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're so much better than me because you own a house, because you work 2 jobs. You don't know what it's like to be me. And you don't know what it's like to earn something and watch the people you love try to rip it out from under you." The room filled with thick, choking silence. Then she said it, the thing she thought would guilt me into surrender. "I'm not just asking for me, I'm asking for my baby." I stared at her, and for a moment I saw it. Not Julia the manipulator, not Julia the favorite, but a scared woman clinging to the idea that anyone would save her from the consequences of her choices. But it wouldn't be me. "I'm not responsible for your baby," I said gently. "I didn't make her, and I'm not giving up my life because you're scared of yours." She stood there frozen, and for the first time she looked small. "You really hate me," she whispered. "I don't," I said, "but I don't trust you, and I sure as hell don't owe you." That broke her. She grabbed her purse, stormed to the door, and slammed it so hard the windows rattled. As her car peeled down the drive, I stood still, hand on the back of the couch, heart pounding. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Like I'd finally told the truth I'd swallowed for too many years. And now that it was out, nothing could make me take it back. That night, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was hostile. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, it all felt amplified, like the house itself was waiting for something to happen, or warning me that something would. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't light candles or pour wine like I usually did when I needed to unwind. Instead, I paced the living room, rubbing the same spot on my wrist where my watch used to sit before I lost it during a double shift at the hospital 2 years ago, back when time still felt like mine. I couldn't stop replaying the last 48 hours. The whispers at dinner. Julia's voice, syrupy and smooth, layered with manipulation. And that final door slam echoing down my porch like a warning shot. It wasn't over. I knew my family. I knew how they operated, smiles in public, knives in private. And once they decided something belonged to them, they would keep pushing until they got it. Logic wouldn't stop them. Morality wouldn't either. Not when they thought Julia's unborn child deserved my home more than I did. I stopped in front of the bay window, arms wrapped tightly around my ribs. Outside, moonlight cast pale shadows across the gravel drive. My SUV sat like a silent ally, the only thing I could count on to take me away from this place when the time came. They won't stop. The words slipped from my mouth like a secret I'd kept too long. And suddenly, the fear twisted into something colder, sharper. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out the red leather folder I'd buried behind my photo albums, and spread its contents across the kitchen table. Mortgage documents. Inspection reports. A few scribbled numbers from when I first calculated what it would take to renovate the porch. It hit me in that moment. They wanted to force me out, to make me the villain so they could wear the halo of sacrifice. But what if I moved before they could corner me? What if I sold the house on my terms before they ever had a chance to claim it? It wasn't surrender. It was survival. And it was smart. I rifled through my old contacts until I found the card for Michelle Parker, a real estate agent who'd helped me house hunt years ago. Sharp, efficient, and tough as nails. The kind of woman who could sell a sandcastle in a hurricane. My fingers hovered over my phone, heart thumping. Was I really going to do this? Yes, because staying and waiting for another betrayal, that would be the real loss. I hit call. "Michelle Parker speaking," came the bright, confident voice on the other end. "Hi, Michelle. This is Eva Brenner. I think it's time I sold my home." There was a pause, then recognition lit up her voice. "Eva, of course, that beautiful cottage just outside of Crestwood, right? Are you relocating?" I hesitated. "Let's call it Strategic Retreat." Michelle chuckled knowingly. "Understood. Do you want to meet this week to go over pricing and prep?" "Sooner. I want a clean sale, fast, no delays, no complications." "I can be there tomorrow at noon." "Perfect." After we hung up, I just sat there for a moment, staring at the dim reflection of myself in the kitchen window. My hands were still trembling, but not from fear anymore, from clarity. I grabbed a notepad and started writing down what needed to be fixed before a listing. The creaky step on the back porch, the closet door in the guest room, the loose cabinet handle I'd been ignoring. I didn't have to make it perfect, just ready. Just mine, all the way through to the finish line. They could watch from a distance as their prize slipped away, because I wasn't just leaving. I was cutting the strings. They thought they could corner me into giving up what I'd built. But they'd forgotten who I was, who I had to become to survive every sleepless night, every unpaid loan, every time Julia came crying and left with my coat or my cash or my car. I stood up, shoulders squared. This wasn't defeat. It was checkmate. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's old microwave popcorn. It wasn't much. A second-floor walk-up with stiff windows, laminate floors, and a view of the laundromat across the street. But it had locks that only I had the key to, a lease in my name, and most importantly, no trace of my family in any corner. It took 3 trips to bring in what little I'd taken from the country house. Clothes, important documents, a few cooking supplies, and the photo of the house I'd taken the week I moved in, when the yard was overgrown but mine. Now it sat on the bare kitchen counter, leaning against a box labeled utensils. It looked like a souvenir from another life. I dropped my purse on the table, pulled out the keyring, and stared at it. My new set had only 2 keys, one for the door and one for the mailbox. It was light, strangely comforting, like the physical weight of family obligations had literally been lifted. I took a deep breath. The air was different here. No cedar, no wood smoke, no echo of footsteps down an old hallway. Just traffic, bakery smells, and the occasional honk from the street below. I stood by the window and watched a couple arguing near the crosswalk, their hands waving, their faces red. A pizza delivery scooter zipped by. A woman walked a fluffy little dog in a Christmas sweater. Life. Loud, messy, indifferent. It made my old house seem like a museum, frozen in time, stuck in a loop of obligation. My phone buzzed, again. I didn't have to look. I already knew it was Julia, probably trying a new angle. I let it buzz out, then another one came in, then another. Finally, I flipped it over, 4 unread texts, all her. "You left the house in such a rush. Are you really doing this? Mom says you're being irrational. We can still fix it. This baby is coming, Eva. What kind of aunt walks away? Be reasonable. This doesn't have to turn into a fight." But it was a fight. Not one I started, but one I was finally willing to finish. I didn't respond. I turned the phone on silent and tossed it in the drawer. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the apartment, noting each window, each corner. My instincts were still on edge, expecting someone to barge in, expecting someone to shout my name from the porch. But there was no porch. No one knew the code to this building's front door. No one had keys but me. And that realization, it did something to me. I boiled water and made tea. My favorite blend, hibiscus and ginger, one Julia always said smelled weird. I curled up on the only chair I'd brought so far, an old armchair I'd reupholstered myself, and pulled a box toward me as a makeshift footstool. I sat there alone in the middle of an unfurnished room with no plan beyond the next 30 days. And I felt peace. Not the kind you get after forgiveness. The kind you get after escape. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't on the defensive. I wasn't bracing for a guilt trip, or steeling myself for some twisted performance of, "We're just doing what's best for you." I'd made a choice. A real one. I looked around the tiny space. There were no family photos on the wall, no memories of slamming doors or whispered schemes. No one calling my name from the next room, asking for one more small favor. Just the steady thrum of city life outside, and me, heart still beating, hands still steady, finally claiming space that wasn't soaked in betrayal. I picked up the house photo and turned it over. On the back, in fading Sharpie, I'd written, "My peace, my rules." I smiled bitterly. How naive I'd been to think that message would protect me. But now it would, because that peace wasn't tied to a building anymore. It lived in my boundaries, in my spine. In the quiet voice that finally shouted, "Enough." I reached for my notebook and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. "They don't get to decide where I sleep." And they never would again. Michelle Parker arrived at the country house that Friday morning with a blazer too crisp for the countryside and a clipboard full of confidence. She stepped out of her SUV, heels clicking on the gravel like punctuation marks. "Still as charming as I remember," she said, surveying the porch. I nodded, arms folded. "Let's hope charm sells." Inside, the house felt unfamiliar already, like it had started pulling away from me the moment I made the decision to let it go. I didn't cry, though. I was past that, or at least I thought I was. Michelle walked through the rooms quickly, making notes, pausing at the fireplace. "Original stonework," I nodded. "You've taken good care of this place, Eva. Buyers will notice that." I want it sold fast, I said. No delays, no drama, no long closing windows. I'm not here to play games. She met my eyes and nodded. Understood. We signed the paperwork at the kitchen counter, the same spot where Julia once begged me for help with rent before going to Vegas with her friends. Once the ink dried, it felt real. Like the last door I hadn't locked behind me had just shut. I wasn't letting them take it. I was giving it away on my own terms. That distinction mattered more than I expected. 3 days later, interest rolled in like clockwork. Michelle had barely listed the house when a buyer reached out, a man named Daniel Carter. Early 40s, corporate but not stiff. She said he liked properties with character. He wanted a tour that same week. I agreed but insisted Michelle be there. I didn't want to explain anything. I just wanted a clean exit. Daniel arrived on Thursday, dressed in jeans and a peacoat, holding 2 coffees. "You like almond milk?" he asked as he stepped onto the porch. I blinked. "How did you?" "Michelle told me," he said with a smile, handing me the cup. "Said you're the one who built this place up from nothing." Michelle raised her eyebrows like he's a charmer, but I wasn't in the mood to be impressed. "Come in," I said simply. He walked the house like a man who understood space, touching the walls lightly, glancing at the ceilings, pausing at the windows just long enough to appreciate the view. When he stepped onto the back porch, he let out a low whistle. "You can't build this kind of quiet," he said. "You have to earn it." That gave me pause. He turned to face me. "Why are you selling?" I hesitated, then said, "Because keeping it would cost me more than it's worth." He didn't press, just nodded like a man who knew that pain had weight. We sat on the porch while Michelle finished taking photos. Daniel looked at me and said, "I'll take it, full price, cash, quick close." I raised my eyebrows, just like that. "I don't haggle when I know what something's worth." I sat back. "Then you'll understand when I say this needs to be clean, no favors, no strings. You're buying the house, not a memory." Understood. I handed him my business card, a leftover from the nursing job I'd taken a sabbatical from months ago. "All communication goes through Michelle," he smiled. "No problem, and for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. You don't know me. I've bought enough broken houses from tired people to know when someone's reclaiming power," he said. "And that's what this feels like." I didn't reply. I just sipped my coffee and stared out across the trees, feeling the weight of his words settle in a place I didn't know was still sore. When he left, Michelle looked at me. "That was smooth. Too smooth." "No," she said. "He's the real deal. I think he gets it." I glanced around the house, the sunlight pouring through the east windows, the little dent in the wall from when I moved in the couch alone, the spot on the floor where I used to sit and eat ramen after long shifts. Letting go didn't feel like failure. It felt like survival. And survival, I was learning, is its own kind of victory. It had been 4 days since Daniel signed the offer, and the world around me had gone quiet. Almost too quiet. No texts from Julia, no voicemails from my mother, no veiled threats disguised as concern from my father. I'd blocked them all, but even silence has a tone, and this one felt loaded, like the breath someone takes before yelling. I spent the quiet days in the city trying to feel normal. I'd go for walks near the river, letting the cold sting my face, pretending it meant something to look at strangers and know they didn't know me. I baked banana bread. I even hung a photo in the hallway of the new apartment, just one, just enough to pretend this might be home soon. But the stillness never settled. Because silence in my family didn't mean peace. It meant plotting. And sure enough, the call came the next morning. I was making coffee when my phone vibrated on the counter. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, almost. But then I saw the area code, Crestwood. I picked up, heart in my throat. "Eva," came my father's voice, tight, controlled. "Come to the house now." There was no explanation, just a click and the dead tone humming in my ear. For a moment, I stood frozen. I hadn't heard his voice since the dinner. Since that dinner, he didn't sound angry. He sounded cornered. I grabbed my keys before I could think too hard and drove out to the country. The sky had turned gray, heavy with the threat of snow. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence was company enough. My fingers gripped the wheel tighter the closer I got to the house. When I turned onto the gravel drive, I knew something was wrong. Daniel was already there, standing beside his car, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. I parked behind him and got out slowly. "What's going on?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just pointed toward the house. The lock's broken. My stomach dropped. What? They forced it, he said, voice clipped. The front door's been kicked in. I called the police before I even stepped inside. My mouth went dry. Who? He didn't need to answer. I already knew. A siren wailed in the distance, getting closer. Daniel pulled out his phone and showed me something. There's a camera under the porch light, motion triggered, got the whole thing. The screen lit up with grainy footage, first my mother, then my father, prying the screen off the front window, trying the door. Then, my father with a crowbar. They said it's still family property, Daniel muttered. I guess they think that means laws don't apply. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My chest felt tight, like my ribs were shrinking inward. The police cruiser arrived minutes later. They took statements, asked questions. I could barely get the words out. When I told them my parents didn't live there, had never lived there, the officer nodded grimly. You're lucky there's video. We're filing charges. And then it happened. They led my father out of the house in handcuffs. He was shouting, red-faced, furious. She's ungrateful. We made her. That house belongs to this family. I watched from the porch, my body frozen, my heart somewhere between triumph and devastation. He looked at me once, just once, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear, not fear of me, but fear of losing control. The officer pushed him into the cruiser. The door slammed shut. Daniel stepped beside me. You okay? I nodded slowly, but I wasn't. Because seeing my father dragged away wasn't satisfying. It was sad. It was the final proof that he didn't see me as a person, just as an extension of their needs. A tool. A pawn. And I had just taken myself off their board. I used to think there were limits. Lines that family wouldn't cross, even in anger. Boundaries protected by love, or at the very least, by decency. But standing in my ransacked living room, staring at the broken front door, I realized something chilling. My family didn't recognize boundaries, only opportunities. The wood around the frame was splintered and sagging, the lock hanging loose like a tooth knocked out in a fight. There were muddy boot prints on the floor. My father's, I was sure. He'd never bothered to take off his shoes, even when I begged him not to scratch the floors after I refinished them. I walked in slowly, numb, the cold outside still clinging to my coat. Daniel followed, careful to stay behind me like he knew I needed space. They broke the door, I said again, voice quieter this time. I didn't need confirmation. The footage on Daniel's phone said it all, my father with the crowbar, my mother standing guard like it was their God-given right to destroy something they didn't own. He nodded. Police filed the report. Charges are pending. They really think it's theirs, I whispered. Even after everything. They think you're theirs, he said, not unkindly. And when someone like that starts losing control, they panic. I sat down on the couch, the one piece of furniture that still looked untouched. I didn't trust it. I felt like even the cushions might betray me. They didn't come to talk. They came to claim it, I muttered. Like they were entitled. Daniel didn't interrupt. He sat in the armchair across from me, watching me closely but respectfully. I was used to people trying to fix me with words. Julia's sugary manipulation, my mother's passive-aggressive guilt, my father's cold, clipped scolding. But Daniel was different. He didn't want to fix me. He wanted me to speak. I looked at him finally. You said I remind you of your daughter, he nodded. She's tough, fierce, grew up too fast, just like you. Does she speak to you? She does now, he said, then added with a shrug. Took a few years. The words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. I don't think I want to speak to them again, I admitted. Not after this. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then don't. You don't owe anyone access to you, especially not people who treat your life like a bargaining chip. His voice was steady, but not without emotion. I'm not pressing charges, he added. Not because they don't deserve it, but because I think watching you walk away with everything they wanted and couldn't control. That's punishment enough. I stared at him. You really think that's enough? I think letting them poison your peace any further is worse. That stayed with me. Later, after the officers were gone and Daniel had left to finalize some paperwork, I stayed behind. I walked from room to room, not looking for damage, but for closure. In the kitchen, I found the drawer where I used to keep the emergency money envelope, emptied. In the bedroom, the closet door was ajar. My old coat was gone. One of my grandmother's porcelain figurines gone. They weren't just angry. They were looting. I took out a notebook from my bag and made a list: what had been stolen, what could be salvaged, what needed to be repaired. It helped. Sorting through the wreckage felt like taking back control, even if just in tiny pieces. By nightfall, the sky had turned that pale, metallic gray it gets before snowfall. I stood on the porch, arms wrapped around myself, staring out at the woods behind the house. I used to imagine raising a dog here, maybe planting a small orchard, something quiet, something my own. Instead, this house had become a battlefield, and while I'd survived, I couldn't pretend it hadn't scarred me. As I locked the door, well, what was left of it, I paused with my hand on the knob. They had crossed every line, and now they didn't get to draw any more. The next morning felt different, not because the world had changed, but because I had. I drove back to the city in silence, the landscape outside the window blurring past, but my mind refusing to settle. Something inside me had finally snapped loose, not in rage, not in defeat, but in clarity. I had protected the house. I had drawn a line, but somehow it still didn't feel like a victory. When I got back to the apartment, the messages started pouring in. Voicemails from my mother, vague, dramatic. "Eva, what are you doing? You're tearing this family apart." And then came Julia. Not a call, a post, public, cruel. She wrote a long, rambling Facebook post filled with cherry-picked truths and well-placed lies. She said I'd abandoned our family, said I was unstable, that I was profiting off the suffering of a pregnant woman. She made herself the victim and me the villain, and by the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. The comments poured in. Distant cousins, old friends from school, strangers. Some defended me, most didn't. They didn't know the truth. They didn't want to. Julia knew exactly what she was doing, but the worst wasn't the post. It was the knock on my door that night. It was my father, back again. I didn't have time to think. He shoved the door with his shoulder before I could even ask who it was. The lock held, but only just. He pounded again, voice slurring. "You ruined everything." "Leave," I said, backing away from the door. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You think you're better than us," he roared. "You're nothing without this family." I called the police with trembling fingers, my voice barely working. "My father is trying to break into my apartment. Again, please hurry." Outside, I heard neighbors yelling. One of them, I think, shouted that the cops were coming. My father's voice faltered, then faded. When the officers arrived, he was still there, still shouting, but less certain now. This time, they didn't ask questions. They arrested him on the spot. Again. As they led him away in cuffs, I stood in the doorway, barefoot, half-dressed, and full of rage I didn't even know how to name. He looked at me with something I couldn't quite place. Shame? Regret? No, it was loss. He had finally realized I was no longer the daughter he could guilt into silence. I wasn't the soft one. Not anymore. The next day, Julia's husband showed up. Mark. He looked tired, gaunt, older than I remembered. He stood in the hallway holding his hat in both hands like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to speak. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said quietly. I didn't say a word. Julia's not well, she's scared. And honestly, so am I. We're drowning. I'm working nights. We can't afford the rent. I told her not to push you, but she doesn't listen to me either." I folded my arms. "Why are you here?" He looked down. "Because the baby's coming, and we have nowhere else to go." The air shifted. Not with guilt, but with something else. Resolve. I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit, just stood there, defeated. "I'll buy a place," I said finally. "For the baby." He looked up sharply. "Not for Julia, not for any of you. I'll make sure that child has a roof, but it'll be in her name solely. She can decide later if she wants to share it with her mother." Mark's eyes brimmed with something halfway between gratitude and shame. "You'd do that?" I nodded. "Because that baby didn't choose any of this." He shook his head slowly. "You've done more for her than anyone ever will." I didn't respond. I just turned toward the window, watching the soft glow of the city blur into twilight. Maybe I couldn't undo what they'd done, but I could break the cycle. It didn't take long for the storm to return. A day, maybe two, of eerie quiet. Then it began. Text messages, dozens, some anonymous. Some from numbers I recognized, numbers I'd blocked before but found their way back. My mother's words were poison dressed as sorrow. Julia's were worse, short, sharp jabs dipped in self-pity and barbed guilt. But it wasn't just messages. Julia's lies spread online like smoke in a dry forest. She posted screenshots, selectively cropped. emails with lines twisted out of context, photos from family gatherings with captions like, "She always wanted to be better than us." Followers I hadn't spoken to in years began commenting on my silence. And my silence, it became ammunition. "Funny how quiet people get when they're guilty," she wrote, "but I wasn't quiet because I was guilty. I was quiet because I was exhausted, until the knock came. Not on my door, on my sanity. It was late, close to midnight. I had just turned off the lights, the city humming faintly through the windows. Then came the pounding, 3 sharp hits, then a pause, then 2 more. I froze. My blood ran cold. My hands went slick with sweat. Another pound, then Eva. His voice, my father again. I rushed to the door but didn't open it. I leaned in just enough to hear what he was saying. "You think this is over, you think you won," he bellowed. "You ruined everything." I stepped back, fumbling for my phone. "I gave you everything," he shouted. "I fed you, I put a roof over your head." My voice trembled as I called 911 again. "Please," I whispered. "He's back. My father, he's trying to break in again." As I waited for the dispatcher to finish her questions, I heard a thud, something heavy against the door. He was trying to force it open. "Help is on the way," the dispatcher said. But all I could hear was the thud of his shoulder hitting the wood and my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. Outside, lights flicked on in other units. Neighbors peeked out their doors, some filming, others calling out to stop. Then came the sirens. The flashing lights poured into the hallway, bouncing off the walls like salvation. I opened the peephole and watched as officers shouted for him to step away. He hesitated, just long enough to shoot me one final glare, like I had betrayed him, like this was my fault. And then he was cuffed, again. But this time there was no yelling, just silence. I didn't cry. Not until the officers were gone and the door was latched and deadbolted and I sat on the floor in the dark, my knees pulled tight to my chest. I cried not because I was afraid, but because there was nothing left to be afraid of, because this time it was real. This time he wasn't coming back and I had survived it. The world didn't collapse after my father's arrest. It just quieted. No one called, no one posted. The chaos gave way to something even more unnerving: absence. Julia's page went dark. My mother's number stayed silent. It was as if they'd gone underground, licking their wounds, plotting the next move. But this time I wasn't waiting around for it. I had my own move to make. It started with a call to Mark. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice scratchy like he hadn't slept. "I'm fine," I said. "I've made a decision." A pause, then about the apartment. "Yes, I'm buying one for the baby." I heard his breath catch. "Eva, you don't have to." "I do," I said, firm but calm. "Because I can't have children, Mark, I can't." And I made peace with that a long time ago. But this baby, she didn't ask for any of this. She deserves more than a guilt-fueled tug-of-war. He didn't speak. "I'm not doing this for Julia or your family. This isn't forgiveness, it's prevention." Mark's voice broke on the other end. "You don't know what this means. I've been trying to hold everything together, but Julia, she's spiraling. Your parents, I think they broke something in her." I didn't say it aloud, but I thought she let them. "Do you have a lawyer?" I asked. "I know, I mean not really. Why?" "Because the deed will be in your daughter's name, no one else. You'll need to sign a trustee agreement. When she turns 18, it's hers, no takebacks, no strings, and if either of you try to leverage it against me down the line, I'll burn the whole thing down." He let out a small, sad laugh. "You really mean that?" "I do. You'd really do all that after everything." I paused, then said, "Because it's the only revenge that matters. I break the chain, I protect the next one." I hung up before the emotion could spill out and make things messy. The next few days moved fast. I toured modest buildings with reputable agents. No frills, nothing flashy, just safety, proximity to a good school, good lighting, enough space for a crib, a quiet nursery, a start. I found a 2-bedroom on the East End, light blue trim, a balcony just big enough for a toddler to watch the rain from. I bought it in full. And when I signed the deed, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just smiled faintly at the name typed across the top, an unborn child's name. A child who would have a home even if the rest of her family couldn't offer her peace. My lawyer raised an eyebrow when I handed over the trust instructions. "You sure about this?" "Yes," I said. "It's not about giving her everything." "Then what?" "It's about making sure no one can take anything away." When I called Mark to confirm it was done, he didn't say much, just a long silence. Then, "Eva, you've done more for her than anyone ever will." And I believed that. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do for someone is stop a legacy of pain before it reaches them. And that was my final act of revenge, a roof with no strings, a future without threats, a name on a title that belonged to no one but her. The apartment was nothing special. No crown molding, no glossy staging, no jaw-dropping skyline view. But when I stood inside it, sunlight washing through the smudged windows and landing on the bare floor, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. It was quiet, not the suffocating silence of betrayal, but the kind that hummed with possibility. A place waiting to become something good. The deed was finalized, registered, signed under the name of a baby not yet born, whose life had already been tangled in family fractures. A girl who didn't yet know what had been done in her name, but one day would. Mark met me at the building's front steps, wearing a windbreaker and an expression so full of humility I barely recognized him. "She'll be safe here," I said simply. He nodded. "I still don't know why you're doing this." "I told you," I replied. "It's not for Julia or for you, it's for her. I meant why you'd go this far after everything." I looked around. The neighborhood was ordinary. Buses screeched at corners, kids rode bikes without helmets, someone's dog barked from a third-floor balcony, because it was real, because it didn't belong to anyone but the child. "She deserves something untouched by their manipulations," I said. "A start, I never got one, neither did you, probably." Mark swallowed hard. "They're furious, you know, your parents. They lost the right to be anything about this." He didn't argue. I handed him a copy of the trust documents. "Your trustee until she's 18, then it's hers legally, fully." He turned the papers over in his hands like they weighed more than they should. "And if Julia tries to twist this, if she uses it as leverage or punishes the child for it, it's gone," I said flatly. "I'll revoke the trust and sell the unit. I've structured it so I can." Mark nodded slowly. "She's not in a good place, but maybe this will help." "I'm not betting on it," I said. Then, after a beat, I added, "But I'm hoping she'll at least be decent enough not to destroy what's meant for her own daughter." That was the most hope I could afford. Before we parted, Mark turned to me with eyes that looked 10 years older than the man I once knew. "I wish you were the mother," he said, voice raw. "I wish this baby had you instead." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I walked back toward my car, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was walking toward something. Not redemption, not reconciliation, but resolution. The kind of resolution that comes when you stop waiting for the people who hurt you to say sorry and start building something that ensures they can't hurt the next person. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. And mine would be clean. 6 years later, the world looked different. Not because it changed much, but because I had. The little apartment I'd bought was now covered in sidewalk chalk, sun-bleached tricycles, and a wind chime that never stopped singing. The trees out front had grown taller. The paint on the door had faded, and the mailbox leaned slightly to one side. But the place had life in it, and laughter. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, watching as a little girl with curly brown hair zigzagged between the hedges with a pink backpack swinging behind her. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy chasing a bubble that had drifted too far. Then she looked up. "Auntie Eva," she squealed. My knees hit the pavement faster than I expected, arms wide as she ran into them. She smelled like grass and juice boxes. "You came," she said, breathless. "Wouldn't miss it," I smiled, brushing a leaf from her hair. "First day of summer camp, huh?" She nodded solemnly. "I packed my own bag. Mommy says I'm brave." I didn't say anything about Julia. There were still bruises there, deep ones. We hadn't rebuilt. We'd simply kept our distance. Mark sent photos sometimes, short updates, but Julia never called, never asked, and maybe that was for the best. "Is it true?" the little girl asked suddenly, pulling back to look at me. "Is what true? That this place is mine, that I live here because of you?" I looked at her, those wide, wondering eyes, the kind of eyes that hadn't yet been lied to. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, kneeling to her level. "This is yours, because everyone needs one person who will protect them no matter what." She leaned into me again, arms tight around my neck. And in that moment, every ounce of pain I had carried, every betrayal, every slammed door, every accusation melted. Because here she was, untouched by it all. Free. Mark waved from the doorway, his beard streaked with more gray than I remembered. He gave me a small nod. Gratitude, or maybe something more like understanding. I stayed a while. We sat on the steps. She told me about her favorite camp counselor, how she wanted to be a veterinarian, how she didn't like juice with bits in it. And as the sun dipped behind the row of apartment buildings and fireflies began to blink their way through the yard, I stood up and kissed her head. "I'll see you soon," I promised. She smiled, a gap where one front tooth had been. "I know," she said, "because you always come back." I walked away slowly, the air warm against my skin. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I had built something. Not a home, but a promise. A shield that would last longer than any house. A legacy of protection, not possession. And as I slipped into my car and drove off, the soft sound of laughter behind me, I thought, maybe that's all I ever wanted. To be the kind of person I once needed. And to make sure that someone else never has to fight the same war I did, just to sleep in peace. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. What would you have done in Eva's shoes? And don't forget to share where you're watching from. This story is for anyone who's ever had to defend their peace.